All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Boyd Stevenson with the National Tank Truck Carriers. Hope you're all doing very well today. We're very excited about getting this thing started. In just 1 second, we'll be doing this. And I first want to introduce our guest speaker, David Yessen. David, can you talk real quick just to make sure that you're coming through?
I am here and I'm ready to go whenever you are.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much, David, for coming through. Everyone should be viewing the SMS slides at for the CSA. They should be what's up on your screen. We should be going about an hour today or so. David's going to present talking about how to look at your scores as well as how to get a idea of what the changes are that are coming. I'm going to do a very quick run through on one of the changes and how it will specifically be affecting our industry at the end, and then we'll do some quick Q&A. So with that, David, take it away. The floor is yours.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you very much. And welcome, everyone. As was stated, my name's Dave Yessen. I'm with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, specifically with the CSA division. My main focus is basically the CSA program. And that's why I'm coming to you today to discuss a little bit about the what we refer to as SMS Package 2 and its associated preview. Well, first figure out how to advance the slides. Oh, perfect. Okay, and so today, basically what we're going to do on today's call, we'll talk a little bit about, why do we propose these methodology changes. We'll talk a little bit about, the changes themselves. We'll discuss the timeline that we have set forth, the SMS preview, and specifically some of the things that may impact that timeline, primarily the FAST Act. And then we'll also have a little question and answer period. What we'll be looking to do at that point in time is to hopefully answer any questions you have concerning any kind of methodology changes for the preview itself. I would ask that, if you try on topic, we'll try to focus strictly on the SMS package, but if we do topic, that's fine. I'll do my best to answer whatever questions you may have. All right, so let's kind of jump into it right away. Why we do this? Because basically we said from the day one that CSA and SMS is a constantly changing program. We never wanted to come up with something that was static that had to be changed every few years with a completely new program. We wanted something that we could keep updated, that we could change as new became available or new comments and concerns came in from stakeholders or other enforcement staff. The things that we do with SMS, and like what I try to every conversation about SMS with is you need to remember that SMS is first and foremost a prioritization tool for us. It is how we determine, what we're going to task our resources with regards to conducting investigations. It is a prioritization tool. Everything that we do is basically designed to make sure it's the best prioritization tool available to our agency and allows us to get to the motor carriers that need our attention first and foremost. Whatever else it has become is basically secondary. Just remember that it is designed as a prioritization system. But as with anything, we're open to feedback. And we've been basically listening to all our industry partners, stakeholders, enforcement personnel. Whenever they see something that says, maybe we can do this a little bit better, and you've seen these changes, this is not package 2 for a reason other than we've already had a package 1 changes, and we've had changes even before that. As a matter of fact, we've already started thinking about quote-unquote package 3 changes. So we're constantly refining, constantly looking for new ways to do things. But one of the other things that you need to know too, we don't do anything unless the data supports it. And any kind of proposal we make or any kind of changes we make, we've run the data, we've looked at various options, we've looked at different ways of doing things, but we constantly run data to see if it's going to make any sense for us from a prioritization standpoint. This is a systematic approach. I will say this package 2 has sort of gone beyond the normal timeline that we like to look for. Normally speaking, we try to go, once a year. Start with a notice, a Federal Register that basically says, hey, here's what we're proposing, and you saw this was released earlier last year, I believe. And then after that, we, get some comments, we get the feedback back in, and we develop what we refer to as the preview website. And preview website, it's important because one of the things that we don't want to do is release a change or have an impact without knowing what kind of consequences there are. So we basically develop a preview, and with any kind of preview, it involves IT, and when you involve IT, you got to make sure everything lines up, but we've gotten pretty good about doing that. And then the purpose of the preview is to get the information out outside of normal SS, let motor carriers, let stakeholders look at certain information, determine whether or not these changes make any sense. We're asking you to make comments on this. These package of changes, so asking you to make comments without actually seeing how it impacts you, I don't think would be fair. So that's the point behind the preview. We want to make sure what kind of impacts are we expecting with this. And, at that point in time, there's an opportunity for feedback and comment. And if there's something else that we need to change or something else that we need to tweak, like I said, we're open to it. And if it doesn't get done in package 2, maybe it gets looked at for package 3. We get a lot of ideas from folks that put information into and responding back with their comments. Like I said, that's basically why we do the preview. And we want to make sure that these refinements are in the best interest of us as an agency from a prioritization standpoint, but also it's fair to our stakeholders as well. What are our objectives when we do this? Well, I said it, and I keep saying it because it's kind of like, the one thing I always want to get across. We want to make SMS as effective as possible, and we start prioritizing carriers for any type of intervention or investigation. That is our main, focus when we start making any kind of modifications or changes to SMS. These changes also, we want to focus on the carriers with the highest crash rates, and basically, data that indicates they have serious safety problems. And then finally, we want to make sure we're getting to the motor carriers that are involved in, the majority of crashes. These are our objectives. So when you're going through these enhancements that we're going to be talking about, keep these 3 objectives in mind, because this is basically what we're going to be talking about. So objective 1, and we had debated originally just discussing some of the the impacts regarding hazardous materials and cargo tank carriers on this call, but I thought it would be important just to kind of run through them all because these enhancements that we're making are going to have impacts on all motor carriers. So it's important that we discuss them all in totality so that when you have any questions or comments, we can focus on HM specific stuff. But if questions about some of the other things, it's important you get those questions answered. And if you have comments, it's important that you make comments as well. So when we start talking about prioritizing carriers, a couple of the enhancements that we're talking about, one of the things that we use for some of the basics is a carrier's utilization factor of power units. And it sort of factors into their exposure. Up the utilization factor, the mileage allowance is one of the things that we use for pricing, motor carriers properly, simplifying our data sufficiency standards, as to when we actually assign a percentile, and finally segmenting the hazardous material compliance basic by cargo tank and non-cargo tank operations. The second objective that we talk about, improving our focus on carriers with high crash rates and serious safety problems, adjusting the intervention thresholds, and we'll see that on the next slide. Also, moving what we refer to as operating out-of-service violations from the basic in which they occur into the unsafe driving basic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail when we get there. One of the things I don't want to point out, it's not out-of-service violations, it's operating after placed out-of-service violations that we're talking about. And, well, let's look at slides for the intervention thresholds. And this is kind of just a side-by-side comparison of the current and the proposed. Your current intervention thresholds are on the left-hand columns in the white, and then the proposed are over on the right-hand column in the gray. And these were what we're talking about when we're changing some of the percentiles. As you can see, when you're talking about vehicle maintenance, one of the things we want to do, if you look at the HM carrier column, which is predominantly what we'd be talking about here, it's currently set threshold effective at 75 for a hazardous material carrier. The proposal dropped that down to 70. Correspondingly, when you're talking about controlled substance and driver fitness and HM compliance, that number goes from 75 up to 85%. And the reason we kind of split these out, some of the criticism that we had gotten is that some of the basics aren't really they don't necessarily have that much of a correlation to crash risk. And like I said earlier, it's all about the data. So we sat down and we took a look at these basics, we analyzed the basics, and what we found in the effectiveness test is we found that some basics have a higher correlation to crash risk. Vehicle maintenance had what we kind of referred to as a medium relationship, and then some of the other basics ended up having a lower relation to crash risk. So one of the things that we did with this package is we decided to, adjust the thresholds according to the, correlation to crash risk. We left the high ones alone, unsafe, crash hours of service. We brought vehicle maintenance up into that, high category because we see a lot of violations. We see a lot of carriers scored under the vehicle maintenance. And then we proposed dropping the controlled substance and driver fitness down a little lower based on their low correlation to crash. But these would be the proposed intervention thresholds if and when package 2 goes through. Final objective, focusing on carriers with crash involvement, and this was something that came into play post the first notice. It was not part of our original notice, but again, it is something that came up after the comments were received. We read through the comments and people's concern about, crash, being involved in crashes. So we sat down and we took a look at, crash involvement, and we saw where could we possibly, raise this number. And you'll see that we basically changed or are proposing that we change. You were assigned a crash percentile, raising the number from 2 crashes to need to be involved in 3 crashes before you'll be assigned a percentile. Was the third objective, and that's the enhancement that we'd be talking about. Now, to when you want to take a look at the enhancements, you can go to the preview website, and for those of you that have been there or haven't been there, this is how you can get to it. When you go into regular SMS, you see a link that says, do you want to preview the changes? And when you go to that preview the changes website, if you are logged in, and when I say logged in, you're using your USDOT number and PIN number or logged in through the portal, which means you have full access to your information. If you go to that SMS preview website, you will see how the package 2 changes impact you as a carrier based on live data. If you are not logged in and you go to the website, then basically all you're going to get to see is what we refer to as mock data on carriers that we display for, public purposes. We can't, with that, we're prohibited from displaying any information publicly when it comes to percentiles. So when you go to the, SMS preview website and you're not logged in, you're a public user, then you're only going to get mock data. Thing I want to point out, going forward in the future, the upcoming release of URS, something is going to go away is the whole concept of USDOT number and PIN numbers for logging into SMS and our various websites. Sometime in the near future, you're going to be required to access all of our locations through the portal. So if you currently have a portal username and password, and that's how you access everything, you're good to go. If you do not, I would strongly encourage you to go forward and try to, at going in and getting a portal username and password. That bottom link, it says portal.fmcsa.dot.gov. That is where you would go to access the FMCSA portal, and go there. You would be presented with, click on the arrow, basically a login screen, and that login screen underneath, you don't have a username and password, there's a little link that says register for a portal account. Click here. When you select that, it will then take you over to the next screen, basically dealing with information for, what are here as a company employee or a motor carrier. You would then follow the steps. It will ask you for various information, and again, you'll be granted a portal username and password. One thing to note about the portal, it's not just SMS information. The portal is sort of the one-stop shopping location for motor carriers to obtain information related to cargo tank inspection, registration information, any kind of correspondence that we've sent. You actually on a real-time monitor if an inspection or a crash has come into our data systems within the last 24 hours. So it's actually like it literally is a full access to a lot of the information that we have on motor carriers within our, management systems. So I would strongly encourage you to do that as possible. But with that said, let's continue. Some of the website features, and again, if you go there, it's sort of we've designed it for everyone to use, so that everyone can get in there and understand what they're doing, whether you're a motor carrier, you're an enforcement user, or the general public. And as you can see from this screenshot, if you go to the preview website, this is where you can log into it. You can actually watch a video presentation of these changes that we're proposing. You can go to the Help Center, and I would encourage folks to actually visit the Help Center, because what you'll find there is you'll find what we refer to as a foundational document. It's sort of a 10-page document that kind of walks through each and every enhancement that we're discussing, and sort of gives you a background on why we're proposing it. It gives you an impact and analysis of these changes will do in SMS, and it's sort of that that real good primer as to why we're making these changes. And if you're going to be making comments, it's really good to read that information ahead of time. Also, find a glossary of terms. So if there's a term that we're using that you're not familiar with, it will explain that for you, and it'll help you kind of walk through that foundational document as well. Also, if you're interested in submitting comments about the Federal Register, there's actually a link there that you can do that. And I would, encourage anyone on the phone, if you do have any comments to submit, you've probably less than a week to make those comments, because that comment period looks to be closing on this Saturday, I believe. So if you have those comments, you need to get them in fairly quick. We haven't any requests for extensions, so at this point, I don't know if we would be extending our comment period past Saturday. Through the preview site, and you just kind of want to get a walkthrough, you can take a, referred to as tour the change, and it will literally walk you through each of the enhancement areas and show you what we mean and what kind of impacts it'll have on a mock carrier's information. If you're interested in, take a look at some information related to each of the enhancements, kind of like, what kind of impacts will some of these changes have on the HM compliance basic. If you select that, you'll see that we have the segmenting by cargo tank and non-cargo tank operations, and adjusting the HM basic threshold are two that would impact the HM compliance basic. There's a lot of information there that you can click on, select. I would encourage you to do that. Now, with that, let's dig into the actual proposed enhancements. And we're going to walk through these, fairly quickly. And then at the end, like I said, we're going to answer whatever questions you may have about anything. So feel free. Some of you may have attended some of the webinars we already did on this topic. So if you didn't get your question answered there, or you want to hear you a different answer than that time, then give it a shot. But ask your question. All right. So with that, let's talk about the using of the intervention thresholds first. And these are done basically in like what you would see if you went to the actual preview website. Earlier, one of the things that we propose doing is taking the vehicle maintenance basic and bringing it up into the what we refer to as the high correlation basics. Bring maintenance up a little bit with unsafe, hours of service, and crash as one of the top 4 basics linked to crash risk. So as you can see on this preview screenshot, all I'm trying to do here is tell you what we're changing the basic percentile from and to. So the current percentile for this motor carrier type operation is 8%, and the proposed rate is 75%. And that's all that we're showing you here on the previews page. If you go to the next slide, you'll see impacts for controlled substance. Currently, it's at 80%. We're proposing to raise that to 90%. Again, not really telling you anything beyond these thresholds are being raised. But if you go over and start talking about fitness, this is where we're starting to give you an example of the impacts it would have on a particular motor carrier. This particular example, you said the current threshold is 80%, and we're proposing that it's being to 90%. The impacts on this particular motor carrier, if you look over where you see the little orange triangle with the exclamation point, you can see that this particular carrier's percentile is 84%. Currently, that puts them over the intervention threshold for driver fitness. With SMS proposed changes, their percentiles is not going to change in driver fitness. It is going to stay at 84%. But because the intervention threshold has been raised to 90%, no longer considered above the intervention threshold, and that carrier would not be prioritized for any type of intervention with us, with our agency. So see, in this particular case, that by raising that threshold, this carrier falls off of our prioritization radar with this enhancement. And, we just arbitrarily pick these numbers and arbitrarily raise these percentiles or lower them. It's strictly based on our analysis of the effects of these basics and where they fall with relationship to crash risk. The change we're going to talk about, focus areas with more crash involvement. And this particular enhancement, like I said earlier, in order to receive a percentile in the crash basic, currently you need to have at least 2 crashes. And before I ask the question, I'll knock it out of the way right now. It has nothing to do with whether the crash was preventable or not. In MS, we use all crashes, whether the motor was at fault or the other party involved in the crash was at fault. So in order to obtain a percentile in crash, you need to have at least 2 crashes reported. This proposed enhancement is changing those 2 crashes reported to 3 crashes reported. Now, while one crash may not sound like that big of a difference, the impacts from a prioritization standpoint and the crash rates involved with these carriers, it did lessen the number of carriers prioritized in this basic, and it did not have an overall impact on the carriers that we prioritize in crash, raising this from 2 to 3. So we didn't lose out on any motor carriers that are posing a high crash risk by raising this from 2 to 3. We also looked at raising it from 2 to 5 crashes, but once you do that, not only do you remove a lot of carriers from prioritization, but your crash rate that you're looking at also drops. So we end up targeting carriers that have less risk of a future crash prioritization standpoint. This particular scenario that you look at on the screen, this carrier currently has an 89 percentile in crash, but under the proposed here, because they have less than 3 crashes, they no longer will have percentile in crash, and the wording that says they have less than 3 crashes will be there. Obviously, if we no longer have, 1 or 2 crashes being percentile, we don't have a segmentation in that group, and that would be the safety event group that you see off to the right-hand side. So that is basically a simple change for crash. Talking about carriers with recent violations. To understand what we're changing here, you have to understand what the system currently does, and the system will not assign a percentile to a motor carrier that has not had a violation in either the last 12 months or, and this is the part that we're removing, the last inspection they did have had a violation in that basic. So effectively what we were doing from the SMS prioritization standpoint, if a carrier had no inspections with violations in the last 12 months, but the last inspection they had 13, 14, 15 months ago had a violation in that basic, we were assigning a percentile to that carrier. This basically had a couple consequences, one for the carriers, one for our enforcement staff that was out doing interventions. And basically what it was causing us to do is to go into carriers that recent data did not indicate to us that they had a problem in that basic, but for whatever the reasons, their percentiles were still above the intervention threshold. We had investigators walking into motor carriers. I'm here because your vehicle maintenance basic is above the threshold. And they started looking at the data. They saw that the carrier did not have a violation in that basic within the last 12 months. It actually occurred 13, 14, 15 months earlier. So we want to focus our resources on carriers that are having problems in the near term. What we're proposing with this change, in order to receive a percentile score in a basic, you have to have a violation in that basic within the last 12 months, period. If it was 15 months ago, 14 months ago, which was the last violation, we're not assigning a percentile. Has to have been within the last 12 months. Now, again, off the next question, we still use a full 24 months of data to assign that percentile score. Unless you've had an inspection with a violation in the last 12 months, we want to assign a percentile to that particular basic. That's what we refer to as, some people refer to it as our get well rules, but it's a, sort of a data sufficiency rule for us to make before we start assigning a percentile. The next enhancement we're talking about is sort of, it may impact some carriers. It may have no impact at all. And it really focuses on what we refer to as the utilization factor. The majority of the basics that we use, they look at roadside inspections, and your safety event groupings based on the number of inspections you have. But one of our basics, unsafe when it comes to roadside and also crash, they look at the actual exposure of a motor carrier. And to do that, we've developed a system referred to as the utilization factor, which since we take a look at the number of power units they have, and we look at the number of miles that they travel to calculate their exposure rate. And the cap that we currently have is about 200,000 miles per power unit. And what we had heard from some of the industry stakeholders was that that number was a little too low. What we did is we went back and we took a look at what carriers were reporting from a mileage standpoint, and based on the number of power units they were reporting, and we looked at raising that utilization factor from 200,000 to basically we kind of walked it up 50,000 mile in about 50,000 mile increments. And what we saw that when you raised it from 200 to 250,000 miles, it gave us a better picture from a prioritization standpoint accounting for carriers that, that were traveling high miles, legitimately, and, an accurate exposure rate. Once we started going beyond 250,000 miles, we realized that, the impacts on the percentiles and the impacts that we were seeing in those basics weren't changing all that much. So we basically, we landed at 250,000 miles. So in this particular change, it's kind of hard to see what the differences would be. Obviously, in this particular carrier's case, because we've upped that utilization factor, their measure, consequently, their percentile has changed. If you look behind the red arrow, you'll see what these changes were. If you squint really hard, you can see that, currently this carrier's measure was 3.3 something. With it upping the utilization factor, the measure, which is the carrier's true score related to its safety and how it's doing roadside, went from 3 point something to 2 point something. Had a corresponding percentile change from roughly 60-something% down to 33%. So you can see that by upping the utilization factor from 200,000 to 250,000, for this particular carrier, it reduced its measure, and consequently its percentile dropped as well. And this is all things that occur to a motor carrier that they don't do anything other than report to us their miles and their power units, and the behind-the-scene calculation actually has an impact on this carrier by dropping that number. The next one, this is where we're probably getting into a lot of our conversation, and it's something that came up probably a few years ago, and I go back to the origins of CSA when we first rolled this program out, and one of the things that we had originally done is we had a basic that was referred to as cargo. And I remember that when we rolled out the cargo basic, one of the things that we quickly saw was that carriers that fell at the top of that basic consistently were carriers that were flatbed carriers. And basically, everybody else fell to the bottom of that list. And quickly, we quickly realized that, when a flatbed carrier got stopped roadside, they were, pretty well cited for cargo-related violations as opposed to, a company that operated cargo tanks or even big trailers. They really, no matter what they could do, they constantly rose to the top of that list. And one of the things that they asked for in the very beginning was, is there a way to segment carriers from other types of carriers? And we looked at it and we analyzed it, but one of the things that we found is that we could not do that. MS and CSA, they use current existing data within their systems. We don't create any new data mandates on motor carriers. We don't create any new data mandates on roadside inspectors. We only use data that's available to us. And for those of you that fill out your MCS 150s, updating your information, that under the vehicle categories, there is no category for flatbed trailers. So we had no way of separating those fleets out. There was no way to pull it off the inspection reports, and as a consequence, we realized that the cargo basic basically had to be changed into something else. We rolled those cargo violations into maintenance and created a new basic called the HM compliance basic. Well, with that came another set of issues that kind of fed off of the whole flatbed issue. In this particular case, we were asked, is it possible to separate HM cargo tank operations versus non-HM cargo tank operations? With anything, we sat down and we took a look to see if it's possible. And our hazardous material division worked with our staff out of Volpe that they handle SMS, and they came up with a way to split out cargo tank versus non-cargo tank motor carriers. And this currently uses existing data, and predominantly we rely upon roadside inspection reports. we capture data from the MCS 150 on cargo tanks. We sort of use that as a kind of a check and balance against the roadside piece. But what we're basing this HM compliance segmentation on are, basically roadside data, data inputted by the inspectors roadside. That basically tells us when a cargo tank inspection occurs. A little, verification that we did after the fact, after we came up with the algorithm to determine who is a cargo tank carrier versus who is not. And like I said, it's based on your inspection data. So if an inspector goes in and indicates a hazardous material inspection, and they indicate it's either an MC 300 series or a DOT 400 series or other cargo tank motor vehicle, then counted as a cargo tank motor vehicle inspection for HM cargo tank inspection. If they do not, then it is considered a non-cargo tank HM inspection. After we did this segmentation and we took a look at which carriers fell into which category, what we found is that it pretty much lined up with the information that was being self-reported by carriers with the CS 150s. So we realized that we actually did come up with a pretty good way of segmenting the population, and that's why this HM segmenting was actually packaged to enhancements. For purposes of the change, one of the things that we did is, we make that distinction. If you are 50% or more inspections involving HM and cargo tanks, then you are considered a cargo tank carrier. If you are less than 50% of your HM inspections involve cargo tanks, then you are considered a non-cargo tank motor carrier. And it's that simple. And like I said, we did validate this against the information being reported on MCS 150s, and we found that the carriers that were being called a cargo tank carrier report having cargo tanks. So it's a pretty accurate assessment based on roadside data. With this, you can see the proposed change on this particular motor carrier. Prior to this, suite of changes being proposed, there was no segmentation in the HM compliance basic. With the changes, the carrier, based on their inspections, it obviously had, less than 50% of their inspections involve cargo tank vehicles. They're considered a non-cargo tank motor carrier. Their prior compliance basic percentile was 81%, which put them above the intervention threshold. With these proposed changes, they fall into the non-cargo tank implementation safety event groups, and their percentile dropped to 63%. In this particular case, whether the current percentile was there percent or the proposed is there at 90%, this particular carrier is no longer above that intervention threshold. So in this particular case, this non-cargo tank carrier went from being prioritized in the HM compliance basic to not being prioritized in the HM compliance basic. Now, with that said, we do understand that when you split these carriers out, we're going to have some pretty non-prioritized cargo tank carriers that are going to come up and be prioritized for investigation. And, when I start talking about data and analysis, we do additional analysis beyond that to see, what kind of violations are being found during investigations on carriers that actually are prioritized in the HM compliance basic. And what we found is that, when we go in and do investigations on these motor carriers, we are finding more violations on these types of carriers than carriers that are not above the intervention threshold. So it is kind of that, where there's smoke, there's fire. If you are being written up roadside for HM violations and you are being written up enough to be above that intervention threshold, when we go in to do an investigation, we are finding systemic violations within that motor carrier. So it's a good indicator from a prioritization standpoint which carriers we need to investigate. Unsafe driving, and this was something I had mentioned a little earlier. I don't want to overcomplicate this one because it's actually a pretty simple change. There are about 4 to 5 violations that are cited roadside the enforcement personnel use whenever they discover a driver has violated an out-of-service order. If you take, for example, a violation under Part 395, which is hours of service, driver gets inspected, they get out of service for being over hours. As soon as the inspection folks leave the scale house, they decide they're going to drive away. They get stopped a little while later. Inspector goes into the system and sees that this driver was cited for an hours of service violation and placed out of service and did not satisfy the requirements of that out of service order. So that inspector cites them for an hours of service violation because they're still in violation of the hours of service rules, and then goes in and cites them under hours of service for violating an out of service order. Both those violations end up going into the hours of service basic. Look at this, from data level, we see that, obviously the hours of service violation belongs there. But the, decision to violate an out of service order, is that an hours of service violation, or is that more of an unsafe behavior? So the proposed enhancement that we're making here is we're going to take that violation of the out of service order and move it from hours of service and put it into unsafe driving. Because the decision, like I said, to violate an hour of service order, whether it's for maintenance, for hours of service, it's an unsafe behavior or an unsafe decision. We're still capturing the violation a second time in the particular basic that the violation occurred. We're just moving the violating of out of service order to the unsafe driving basic. When we talk about this, we propose it, a lot of people say, so any hours out of service violation? No, it's just a violation for violating an out of service order that's going to the unsafe driving basic, and that particular enhancement. Now, what you see when you go to the preview, that obviously this is going to have some far-reaching impacts. If you take a violation out of the hours of service basic, obviously that's going to have a impact on that particular percentile. You'll probably see a drop in a percentile because we're moving a violation out. But when you go over to the unsafe driving basic for that particular carrier and you add that violation in, you're going to see obviously the unsafe driving percentile increase. So pull one violation out and you put it into another, you'll obviously see some varying impacts as well. Okay. So with that, those are our proposed enhancements. We're currently, like I said, we have a public preview going up since October. We have a 60-day comment period. The comment period does close on December 3rd, 2016. Please, you need to get your comments in before that time frame closes. And like I said, unless we extend it, that's when the comment period will close. Now, one key thing I want to discuss before it gets asked, proposed enhancements were initially rolled out in 2015. Is basically, 2015 was the year we were going to do package 2. Of course, at times there were delays, things got pushed back, and invariably what happened is we had, when we were preparing this, that came out. And with the FAST Act, it required us to take the CSA program under a review by the National Academy of Sciences, who are looking at it to determine, certain aspects. According to what the FAST Act says, they have to look at certain aspects of it. So it sort of prevented us from, carrying through with any sort of changes to SMS, specifically since, SMS was taken online publicly for non-passenger carriers. When it relates to percentiles, the data is still there, but we can no longer post a percentile publicly. So none of the proposed enhancements that we're making, even if you love them and you think they're good for the industry, none of them will be put into place until the study by the National Academy is completed in accordance with the FAST Act. Now, that doesn't mean they will never implemented. All it means is we're not going to do anything until the study is done. But we do want comments on these proposed enhancements, because if you attend some of the public hearings regarding, the study itself, some of the things that we've addressed with these enhancements are particular concerns that folks have. And we want to make sure that, when we're done with the comment period, we take our enhancements, we will take the comments from our stakeholders, and we will turn that information over to the National Academies. So when they come up with their list of final recommendations for the CSA program, in particular SMS, they can take some of these enhancements into consideration. Really, we have some of these enhancements already address some of the concerns that they may have, and that would make our response back to their recommendations a lot easier. But just at the point in time, we don't plan on releasing any of these enhancements until after that FAST Act is completed. With that, I believe we are at the end of me talking, and we're up for questions.
This is Wade. First, want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to explain to our folks. We're excited that we get to present this opportunity to all of them, and really happy that we have folks from FMCSA that can sort of explain it from the from the horse's mouth. Before we jump into questions, I want to reiterate David's statement about commenting. I think it is probably no shock to him that we intend on commenting on this particular suite of proposed changes, most of which we are very supportive of, I think. I never know until I hear the last word from our members, of course. But I do want to take a second to sort of highlight the changes to switching up between dry van or cargo tank and non-cargo tank segments. Kind of a real quick example, and one of the things that we know anecdotally is that what we know is that the tanks tend to be the better performing fleets within the hazmat basic. The not as well performing fleets, they not necessarily have as high of score, but at the end of the day, this is just kind of a by no means technical example, purely supposition. But let's look at, you've got your raw scores here, and you've got the one that goes to your CSA SMS score right here. Your raw score is just what your totals, these are 10 fake fleets. It has really, sorry, the bottom one, that should be a 1 right there. Now let's look at what happens if we split up the groups. We're going to send all the cargo van fleets to one side, and we're going to send all of the tank truck fleets to the other. And we do this, and you remember that top tank truck fleet, the best one before was 1. Their score is going to stay the same. Before that top, that worst performing fleet had a raw score of 800, and because there was another fleet there that had a score of 1,000, they were only an 80. But now they're the worst, and they're going to move from 80 to 100. But the same thing is going to happen here with some of the lower ones as well. So in general, it's kind of like if you take, guys, we're the high-performing folks in the A basic. It's sort of like we're taking the honors kids out of the class and throwing them in on a curve. Well, before we all got A's, and now all the kids who were getting A's are getting graded against each other, and what means that the worst performing kid who used to get an A is now getting an F. So I really do encourage you to take the time to go in and look at your scores. I think many of you, especially our NTTC members, will be very excited because you put a lot of time and effort into making sure you have a very strong safety program. Some of you may be less excited. I know I've talked to some carriers that have not been especially pleased with what they've seen. And either way, please do take a moment and contact me. Got my email address up there as well as my phone number. That's my direct dial. And with that, that will help inform our comments. The majority of them are written right now, but this, I think, is really the area where we want to make sure that FMCSA hears our voice loud and clear. When a federal regulatory agency says they want to focus on our particular segment, that's really who we want. We want to let them know either, yes, we're very happy about that, or no, we are not. And so with that, I want to say thank you again to David and the team over at FMCSA. I want to say thanks to Fritz Mead, who did all the behind-the-scenes work of making today's webinar work. I'm excited about this, which is a prototype of our forthcoming Tank Truck University. Keep your eyes and your ears peeled on that front. And with that, we will be getting ready to, we can take questions. Let me make sure that David is, yep, David, you're in, we're not mid. You can go ahead and if you have a question, in the bottom right, there is a thing that says chat. Go ahead and send a chat either to everyone or me, and we will go ahead and answer questions. I'm going to give another second or two. Dave, do you have any closing remarks you want to throw in there?
I think it's just important that and a couple times, I get this from folks. There's a lot of good information out there, and a lot of good ideas that we do get from people. And like I said, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I use that example. The flatbed industry came to us and said, "Could you do this?" And we looked and we said, "No, we can't." The passenger carrier industry came and said the same thing. "Can you split us out?" Yeah, we can, but we won't like the results. So there is, we don't do anything on a whim. We really do sit and we do a lot of data and a lot of information before we make any types of changes. So standing concerns across the board sometimes, but when you look at these enhancements that we have, whether it's segmenting cargo versus non-cargo tank, when you factor that in with raising the intervention threshold a few points, then you do see some impacts that I think can make these enhancements a bit more logical. And the reason I wanted to go through all of the changes is because I wanted folks to just take a look at how everything impacts them in total, rather than just focusing on one particular thing. I want to make a comment though. One thing that I think you would have noticed in the second announcement that wasn't in the first. There is the proposal to make the HM Compliance Basic public in first notification, but we did receive a lot of feedback on that. It was valid, especially since we were making the changes to the HM Compliance Basic with the segmentation regarding, do you think it's a good idea to put that information out publicly with these changes in place? So that actual recommendation to making that information public, even before the FAST Act took that out of our hands, we actually, took that out of the second package, the second notice as an actual proposal. So something we would definitely sit back and take a look at. That's why you didn't see it as part of this particular preview, because it's removed.
Thanks. We do actually have a couple of questions.
Okay.
The first one we've got is, you mentioned before that preventable versus non-preventable accidents won't be broken out, but will there be any showing of no fault at all accidents?
Yeah. So we'll tell that question in two parts. The current system that we're using for SMS and the proposed system that we're going forward with it will strictly use all reported crashes in our system. Now again, that's just recordable crashes, fatal, injury requiring treatment away from the scene, or a vehicle had to be towed with disabling damage. There is nothing to do with preventable, fault, non-fault. It's strictly taking all crashes into consideration. I will note, however, that under a separate initiative, we are looking at a way of assessing crashes for preventability, and possibly, aiding that in our data systems. But it is strictly a pilot program upcoming that you should be looking for an announcement on. And then once we work through that, you might possibly see some of that work into SMS. But as of now, it's all crashes, regardless of the fault.
We've got just a few more. David, if you have to run, we do want to be respectful of your time.
You have till 4:30, so feel free.
The question is, will the SMS preview show how our current scores will be in the new system? I think you talked a little bit about that, but you may just want to, here, I'll flip it back over to you.
Yeah, you are, and again, this will be, if you are logged in to the SMS preview site, and when I say logged in, that means you've input your DOT number and your number, or you've gone in through our portal. That's the only way that you can access percentiles and the information. FASTAC removed it from public view, but it still allows carriers and enforcement personnel to go in and look at all the information. So if you're logged in and you go to the SMS preview site, what you see is exactly what your scores would be under the proposed changes. Now, I caution you that it's a preview. This is what you would be if the enhancements were enacted, but we currently use the real SMS data to determine prioritization and whether or not, for purposes. Basically what we tell people is, if on these enhancements you drop below a specific percentile, an investigator shows up in your door and says, hey, you're over a specific percentile, you are over. You can't say, but under the preview, I would be under. Preview is not the data we use. It is strictly there so you can see what these changes have, what kind of impacts they have on your particular scores. But it is real and it is live data.
For you, David, can you tell me what my ISS score is, and where can I find that in my carrier profile in SMS?
Okay, let's tackle that a couple different ways. What the ISS score is, it stands for the Inspection Selection System, and it is a screening tool that is used by roadside personnel doing roadside inspections. So what happens is this. As your vehicle, and I'm going to go old school because, that's the way I used to do it. We be at the scale house. A vehicle will roll through. I take the DOT number that's on the side of the truck. I will punch it into ISS, and it will come up with a score for that particular motor carrier. And then depending upon that score, I will be told to either inspect that vehicle, the option of inspecting that vehicle, or it recommends that I let this vehicle pass. Now, it's a screening tool. It tells me to inspect. I don't necessarily have to inspect it. If it tells me I need to let this vehicle pass, I have to let it pass. Because there may be other factors outside the score that I'm not, that I'm visually seeing, and I have to make that decision on my own. But what the ISS score is, it's strictly a screening score for roadside inspectors to use as vehicles are rolling through inspection locations. And the other cautionary tale I give with ISS scores, your ISS score could be low, and if it's low, then what happens? You get passed. If you get passed enough times, eventually the data in the system gets older and older and older, and for us to make an accurate calculation on your performance, we may need new data. So your score may suddenly go up, and not because you're bad or because you're performing badly. It's simply because the system has identified you as having older data, and you need to come up, for inspection, so we can get new data on you to make sure that you're still holding things together as you had been in the past. As to the availability of the ISS score, that one I would love to get back to you on. I do know it was available at one point in time. You were logged into the SMS, or if you were logged into Safe, I believe. But at the same time, I do know the FAST Act did have to remove certain items, so I'd have to just double check on whether or not that ISS score is still posted.
And we've got one last question before we wrap today. Well, we got two. One of them is, will you be presenting, distributing the presentation? We have recorded today's webinar, and we will be making that available to NTTC members. So do look forward to that. The last question relates to CSA sort of moving in real time. As carriers grow their fleets, obviously their exposure to violations increases. We've got a question from a carrier who is concerned about what they can do to make sure that, that their exposure increases. They can what they can do to sort of mitigate the fact that the system still thinks that they're a smaller fleet. I think the most obvious answer is to submit an early MCS 150 form, but you may have some other answers as well, David.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let me do one thing first. Before I answer that question, let's go back and answer the ISS question. I can say yes. If you log into SMS as a motor carrier and you go to your particular SMS, we refer to as the splash screen, you will see a section that indicates your particular ISS score, and it will tell you the date the score is based upon. It will give you the number, will give you the recommendation that the inspector sees, and it also will tell you what the basis of the recommendation is for. So, for instance, I said earlier, if you have a lot of issues roadside and you're being flagged for an inspection, the basis of that recommendation will be for safety purposes. If it is not for a safety purpose, it will show up at under a different category. But to answer that question, you can get information in SMS, the ISS score. Now, going back to your original question, yes, we recorded this webinar and you can view it or send it out. I also mentioned that at the Help Center preview page, you can actually watch a pre-recorded video as well of the entire presentation in its entirety. And then finally, what can I do? Things that we recommend to carriers. Staying informed and constantly looking at their information is definitely something that will serve you well in the SMS world. You mentioned making sure your CS 150 or whatever version URS brings us is updated is absolutely critically important. I've seen carriers that put the 0 on their mileage reporting and in a single month went from below a threshold in unsafe driving to over the threshold in unsafe driving, all because they made a typographical error on their mileage input. Making sure that that information is accurate is key. Updating it when you need to update it is also important. We have a requirement that you update your information every 2 years, but there's nothing that prevents you from updating it sooner than that. Ensure that you're reflecting the operation, the size of your operation. I will encourage everyone that, review every single piece of data that's assigned to you. If it's an inspection report or it's a crash report, look at it very, very closely. If you see something on it that is incorrect, then you need to use a system that we refer to as data queues. It's an online system that you use to either, to challenge a violation or to report erroneous information that's being assigned to you. And that's, we sometimes I have a lot of requests from carriers regarding, why did my score go up or what happened here? And when I start going in and I start looking at the data, I see things that, I'm like, you really should have challenged this at the time of the inspection because it doesn't make a lot of sense. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, that's why the system's in place. Roadside inspectors are not infallible. Federal investigators are not infallible. Mistakes can get made. And if that happens, then there is a system in place to get that information corrected. I spent a lot of time and effort in the beginning of CSA program to make sure that we had good, solid data. And that meant training and that meant education to everyone involved. I would always caution folks to, double check those inspections, double check those crashes. If you something on your record doesn't look right, call, ask the question. The local division offices, I'm always available. If you see something in your score that doesn't make any sense, then give me a call, and either I can help you, I can either explain it to you, or I direct you to where you need to go to get it addressed. So that would be my recommendation.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time. I want to thank everybody on staff at NTTC that's gone in to help us out with this, from Fritz on the organizational side, Megan in marketing. It's really been a team effort, and this has been our very first TTC solo webinar, and we're lucky to have such great presenters from the agency, and I want to thank all of our attendees. Like I said, we will be making the recording of this available to you as soon as we figure out how to do that, because, again, it is our initial webinar. But appreciate it. We're already knocking around some future topics. We will be reaching out to those of you that joined today and provided your email address. And one of the things we'll be asking about is future topics you'd like to see webinars on. If you signed in and did not provide your email address, that's okay too. You can just email either staff@tanktruck.org or Stevenson@tanktruck.org or Mead@tanktruck.org. And let us know what you thought about today's webinar and whether or not you would like to see more of these, and if so, what topics. Thank you very much. Everyone have a great day.